welcome to this Alibaba.com Powered by Freightos webinar. Today, we're going to focus specifically on FBA and freight. So we've had a couple of these different webinars over the past couple of weeks. Focus the last one on customs. Before that, we had talked about important questions to ask your supplier when you're importing. And the questions that we kept on seeing again and again came up to FBA, and FBA and Amazon sales in general have really seen an uptick as a result of COVID and the rise in e-commerce. So we felt like it made sense just to take that head on and address it. One important byproduct of that is that the questions that you ask shape the type of presentations that we put together. So beyond the fact that we will be looking at the chat and the Q&A during the course of the webinar and answering questions in real time, it also helps us figure out what to talk about next time. But with that, let's dive directly in. So I'll be moderating this event. My name is Eitan Buckman, and I'm the Chief Marketing Officer at Freightos. We work together with Alibaba to run Alibaba.com Freight, powered by Freightos. And we have two rock stars, the freight rock stars of the world, will be joining us today to talk a little bit about FBA and freight. The first is Qian Huang from the Supply Chain Strategy and Operations team at Alibaba.com. The second is Robert, and I've been instructed to just stick with Khachatryan, because hard name to pronounce, but Robert was one of the first sellers on the Freightos marketplace, has been one of the go-to forwarders that we go to for questions, is also available on Alibaba.com powered by Freightos, and is a real powerhouse when it comes to talking about FBA. So Qian, Robert, thanks so much for joining us today.
Yeah, good to be here. Thank you.
Awesome. So just, I know nobody's really here to hear me talk. So just to get past this and go through the agenda, we're going to start off with a very brief overview of international freight, just kind of what the basic process typically looks like. And that's really to orient people that haven't really shipped before. And then we're going to start talking about the subtleties of how FBA is different, right? What makes an FBA shipment different than the international shipments that you've done before? And of course, there are differences. We'll do a quick little walkthrough of Alibaba.com Freight, specifically with a focus on how it works from an FBA perspective. And then we'll jump into the questions and the questions that we've gotten while you were registering for the event. And we had well over 200 questions that came in. So we'll go through every single one. No, I'm kidding. But we'll get to as many as we can possibly try to get to. So with that, let me hand this over to Qian, who can walk through what a typical international freight shipment looks like, and then we'll continue from there. So all yours, Qian. Thank you.
All right, great. Thanks, Eitan. Hi, everyone. My name is Qian. For those who have attended this session before, you should be familiar with some of our content that we've covered. So this is basically a graphic that outlines a typical shipment process for those of you who have attended our sessions before. Depending on your trade term or incoterm, right, you and your supplier might be responsible for the export haulage, meaning the transfer of your cargo from your supplier's factory location in China or Vietnam, wherever, to your freight forwarder's origin warehouse. So if you're shipping less than container load, your cargo will be staged at the container freight station, where your cargo is then being stuffed into a container with other importers' cargo. And if you're shipping a full container, it's being staged at a container yard. So once the export declaration process is completed, less than container load or FCL, the containers will get loaded onto the boat or plane until the ship reaches the destination port, where then they can get transported to the container freight station or another container yard while the customs clearance process is in place before they get to the final destination. So really the key advantage for FBA fulfillment by Amazon is leveraging Amazon's massive fulfillment network. And that also means your shipment is subject to Amazon's strict transportation and inventory management policy when it comes to palletization and labeling requirements. Since Amazon needs to remain in control of its inventory receiving process to ensure their efficiency. And for FBA shipments, Eitan, you can jump to the next one. Thank you. So for FBA shipments, really, there are three important considerations, right? So first one is shipping individual pallets or full containers. Two, is definitely packaging and labeling your products correctly, by Amazon standards. And three is definitely finding an experienced freight forwarder that has extensive experiences, in FBA requirements. So all Amazon shipments must be delivered on pallets other than small parcel deliveries. So all pallets must be labeled with 4 Amazon shipment labels, 1 on each side, in addition to the carton labels. Another key decision here is deciding whether your supplier or your forwarder will be handling the palletization and labeling that is specific to Amazon. So, you should always defer to your freight forwarder who will know all of the requirements that go with, less than truckload, so LTL, which is the final mile of your delivery. Robert from Freight Right here will walk you through the FBA requirements in greater details. Robert.
Hey guys, thanks for having me on. Basically, Amazon delivery requirements fall into 3 groups as far as differentiation goes between delivering to Amazon and any other location for regular imports. And the first group is basically labeling. Amazon shipments typically require 3 sets of labels. FMSKU label, which basically goes onto the product itself. It's the little barcode label, which in some cases, you may not be required if the product is not a white label product, and you may have an exemption from Amazon for that. Qian and I will talk about it in more detail a little bit later. Then you have the FBA carton label and the pallet labels. Both of these are generated from Seller Central when you create the FBA shipment. As Qian said, you can have this done by either your supplier in China or wherever the factory basically can do this, or you can have the freight forwarder handle it once the shipment arrives. You can generate basically FBA carton labels separately from the pallet labels, in case you want the labels applied at origin on the cartons, and then once the freight forwarder palletizes the shipment and gives you the number of pallets, you can then finalize the shipment and actually generate pallet labels. The type of labels you generate, especially the pallet labels, they vary depending on the mode of delivery you select. So it's very, very important to select the right delivery method and stick with it. So for example, if you're selecting UPS as the delivery option on Seller Central, and then you later use an LTL carrier or a regular trucking company, Amazon may not be able to identify the shipment at the time of delivery. So in some cases, this may result in delays of your inventory becoming available. In some other extreme cases, they may actually refuse the freight, and we've seen cases where they actually misplace and cannot find the freight. So it's very important to stick with basically the method you select originally, or to do a little bit of research and maybe consult with your freight forwarder to know what's the best method to select. It's also very important to basically stick with the method, because Amazon doesn't refund shipping. Some of you may have dealt with this in the past. So if you select, for example, Amazon carriers to deliver the shipment, but end up using a different company, a third party to deliver, you cannot cancel the shipment and get a refund from Amazon. So it's very important that you select the right method. Again, the other thing that causes quite a few issues is the ship from address. Definitely check with your freight forwarder what the correct address is. Once you enter a ship from address in your FBA order and generate it, you actually can't change it. So we've had cases where customers use their office address, for example, and then once Amazon assigns a carrier, there's no way to change it to the correct address, and you end up having to create a new order and basically double paying for the shipment. So moving moving on to the second group of requirements, it's basically
actually, Robert, for just 1 second before
Yep.
you continue, I just want to emphasize one thing that's so important that Robert's saying here, which is that I guess 2 things really. The first is that Amazon has scaled because they're very big on standardization. So that means, if they say you put the label in the center of the carton, that's where it needs to be. And if it needs to be on all 4 sides, it needs to be on all 4 sides. So the first thing is those standards mean that Amazon on the freight side is very unforgiving. And the second thing is that your best bet in order to mitigate risks from that is making sure that you consult with the right person, right? And that's where your freight forwarder is really your friend. And I think Robert doesn't want to say that too much because he is a freight forwarder, but really you need to make sure that you have the right people that can provide that type of guidance if this is your first or second time, because you don't want to screw up on this, because you'll end up eating costs. And for so many products on Amazon, the margins can be pretty razor thin. So sorry for that, and back to you, Robert.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. But then, palletization is another part of this difference with Amazon, and it gets pretty tricky sometimes. So unless you're shipping full containers or truckloads, your shipment basically needs to be palletized. Now, this isn't strictly speaking an Amazon requirement. So Amazon does allow for, in theory, any order to be delivered loaded on the floor of the truck. The problem is none of the trucking companies in US would pick up or deliver any parcel shipments on the floor. So they do need to be on pallets to be able to be serviced properly by trucking companies, but also to avoid the risk of getting boxes lost. Now, if you can imagine a driver picking up 200 boxes on his route and doing multiple stops with multiple pickups and deliveries, is just a recipe for disaster if you ship loose cartons. And that's also the reason why trucking companies themselves don't do it. Now, because you have to ship on pallets, you have to basically comply with Amazon's pallet requirements. This is the shipments typically are palletized by freight forwarders once the shipments arrive in US from overseas. We don't actually recommend having your factory palletize the shipments because of the strict rules. Just to give you some examples, Amazon requires that American standard size pallets be used, which are 48 by 40 inches or 122 by 102 centimeters. There are maximum heights that they enforce. Your boxes, with some exceptions, cannot overhang at all. You have the pallet labels that have to be applied properly on all sides. The labels have to be printed with either thermal printers or laser printers. These are all the things you can't really control very well if it's done by your factory. Not all of them have thermal printers or laser printers, and then if your barcode smears, then your shipment gets refused. Pallets are also, American sized pallets are not standard in China or in everywhere else really. So your factory would end up either having to build custom pallets or order them. Now, that makes them not only expensive, but also opens you up for all kinds of risks of the shipment basically getting refused because it's non-compliant, it's made of the wrong type of wood, or it's the wrong height or the wrong material. So definitely, where possible, let your freight forwarder or 3PL handle it once the shipment arrives in the United States. And which leads me to the third group of basically requirements with Amazon deliveries, which is how Amazon handles delivery coordination. So freight forwarders make delivery appointments on an Amazon platform called Carrier Central. It's basically the Seller Central equivalent of what we freight forwarders and trucking companies operate on. And when we make the appointments, they're made based on actual FBA orders, PO numbers, and we also request appointments based on actual number of pallets, number of boxes, number of units for each PO number and each FBA ID. This is how Amazon knows ahead of time basically what's coming into their inventory when. And this is also how when you shop on Amazon sometimes and an item is out of stock, but they do tell you expected in-stock date. This is all driven by carrier central appointments, basically, and them knowing exactly what to expect when. And because they're so stringent and they don't want customers seeing the wrong data, they in turn basically enforce very, very strict KPIs on freight forwarders and trucking companies, which a lot of times result in basically delays and prolonged delivery times, which we don't basically control the delivery time. So Amazon ultimately decides when to grant that delivery window for any given PO number or FBA order. They make this decision based on a number of basically reasons. There's a lot of logic that goes into them. Some of the basic ones are, of course, the warehouse capacity to unload trucks, capacity to store things. But there's, especially these days, there's a lot of other factors that may affect the delivery timing. There could be an outbreak of a virus in some place, or maybe for many reasons this could be delayed. And we often schedule delivery appointments weeks in advance to avoid this, but Amazon, of course, reserves the right and often does cancel or postpone delivery appointments. Eitan, I think I will move on to the ASIN limit.
Okay, but before we move on, is there any way from a shipper perspective that they can mitigate? I mean, is the best strategy to mitigate those delays from the Amazon side just making sure that your goods are kind of close to the FBA warehouse? Like what's the best way of planning in advance? How do you actually mitigate that?
Yeah, so I mean, definitely the closer you are to delivery, the easier it is to manage. I mean, physically, the product being closer to delivery. So, a lot of things can go wrong over a prolonged period of time. So if you're shipping from China, for example, that's, let's say, a 3 to 4 week transit time door to door. A lot of things can go wrong in 4 weeks. I mean, you have port getting congested within a matter of days. You can have tracking capacity be affected. You can have Amazon facilities get overwhelmed within a few days. So if you have an order that's in transit and not due to arrive for another 20 days, that appointment is, of course, is a lot likely to get affected by last minute changes rather than, if you have inventory in US sitting at a 3PL or your freight forwarder's warehouse, and you're only 3-4 days away from delivery, then of course your chances of things going wrong with the appointment diminish. So that's, of course, if that option is available to you, definitely try to stock inventory in US closer to delivery rather than basically shipping on demand from your factories overseas as much as possible, of course.
So just removing as many unknowns as possible in order to
and really shortening the time between when you need inventory restocked and when you have your product available for delivery.
Perfect. Okay, thanks. I'm gonna move
on
to the next one, right? Yep. Sorry.
Yeah, so many of you probably ran into this one. This is fairly new, but Amazon basically started limiting deliveries of new items to 200 units. We don't think this is related to the current dynamics with the coronavirus. We think this is probably a permanent policy that's going to be enforced. The reason is most likely that a lot of sellers are testing new items, and not a lot of them sell, and some of them end up clogging basically the FBA system. So they want to limit the sale of experimental items, if you will. And once you test these 200 units and they do sell, they meet a certain criteria, Amazon automatically bumps up the number on your second order, and then if it continues selling, they will basically either remove the limit altogether or just keep increasing it. But it is a challenge for new sellers, for new items. 200 units is not a lot, especially if you're selling, smaller items. The one challenge, of course, is maintaining inventory, but the other challenge, which is the more expensive challenge, is how to ship 200 units to Amazon. In most cases, sellers order a lot more from factories than 200 units. So what do you do if you have an order of 1,000 units, but you can only send 200 units to Amazon? Well, the answer is probably to find a 3PL in US or find a freight forwarder who provides 3PL services or some kind of warehousing services and have them store your balance of goods. And basically, as soon as you are ready to replenish your inventory, have them send it in versus shipping from overseas, the balance, right? So definitely get inventory into US because that the 200 units in most cases will sell very quickly, and you don't want to be weeks away from your replenishment. Challenge that we run into very often, or the question we have to answer very often, is whether you should create two separate shipments, one with 200 units going to Amazon and then your balance going to a freight forwarder's warehouse or a 3PL. In most cases, it actually doesn't make sense to do that economically. Your best bet, unless you're selling large items where, a 200 unit order may be a few pallets or a container. But I think safely assuming in most cases the items are smaller and you have more than 200 units being manufactured, it makes, most of the time it makes sense to create one shipment on Alibaba Freight for the whole order and send it to your freight forwarder's warehouse, and basically send the 200 units from the freight forwarder or from the 3PL to Amazon and leaving the balance there. You can basically use Amazon partner carriers to transfer the 200 units, or you can use UPS or FedEx or go through your freight forwarder, but basically get the whole thing into a warehouse in US to your 3PL and basically just ship your first order from there, and that will basically flow into shipping your second order from there and third order from there. So you'll go right into that routine of 3PL services, starting with your first order of 200 units. I think with that, I'll hand it off back to Qian to talk a little bit about some of the other FBA questions.
Yeah, sure. So the first one, whether, right, you should use, if you're selling on Amazon, whether you should be using the Amazon fulfillment, so fulfillment by Amazon or fulfilled by merchants. So we actually saw one of the questions from Courtney coming in here. So great question. There are a couple of things to, right, take into consideration. Obviously, you have to always think about your profitability, right? And whichever fulfillment, option that you end up choosing could have a big impact on your bottom line. So obviously, with FBA, fulfillment by Amazon, you're leveraging Amazon's large, logistics network and shipping network. So delivery speed is really definitely, best in class. Your end customers also benefit from receiving free shipping or the 2-day free shipping on their Prime membership. So there's definitely, the benefits there. It also increases your chance of winning that buy box, which is very important, and returns and customer service. This is, again, Amazon's strong area where you have one less thing to worry about. But we do, FBA definitely have its cons. So, we don't recommend for performers. Amazon also charges storage and fulfillment fees. So you really need to understand how quickly your inventory moves, right, in order to minimize your storage charges. And long-term storage fee would apply as well if your products aren't selling, right? So Amazon's in the business of selling products and not storing goods. So, if your goods take up a lot of space and not moving, definitely, take that into consideration. And last but not least, the ease of return that Amazon actually FBA creates could also bring a lot more, increasing returns, which could end up hurting your profitability. So in general, we don't really recommend using FBA if your products are really, large and heavy, bulky. So you'll probably get hit on the high delivery and storage charges from Amazon. If you're also in the prohibited items, right, tobacco, alcohol, that sort of products, definitely, maybe that's not the best, best option for you. Last but not least, certain products that are more seasonal, it's harder to predict your sales volume. So like we recommend maybe staying away from those as well. So whether it's
Chen, on that, just one quick thing, and especially this week. So it is possible to get that FBA, to get that prime shipping label, even if you're not doing the fulfillment yourself. But I know recently Amazon has been much more stringent about that. So for people that do want to get that prime shipping label, if they're doing the fulfillment themselves, it's getting increasingly difficult to maintain that prime shipping capability. And if you really need that, and as Chen mentioned, to get the buy box, you basically are almost forced into using FBA for the most part.
Right. Yeah, definitely. So, Amazon also has, tools for you to estimate your sales margin using their selling calculator. There's also an FBA revenue profitability calculator as well. So definitely make sure you do your P&L analysis, preferably by product if you're selling multiple, and making sure that you have a clear understanding of your profitability to figure out which one is the right option for you. Yeah. Right.
Okay.
Sorry, go ahead. Oh, no. So yeah, this one, how you packaging this and who's responsible for labeling, as Robert mentioned before, right? There are the FN label, which stands for the fulfillment, right, network stock keeping units. So those are the labels barcodes to apply to your individual products, and that your supplier can do. So we recommend if you're selling private label, Eitan, could you press I think there's a couple more text. Yeah. So if you're using, if you're selling like private label, we definitely recommend, making sure that you are not commingling your inventory with other sellers' units, because, if they're not really selling great products or quality, right, you could potentially get dinged on that because your inventory is mixed with other sellers' products that are selling identical products. So definitely consider FNSKU label, carton labels, pallet labels. These are actually things that either suppliers or freight forwarders can help with. So Robert has gone into greater detail, so I won't cover that extensively here.
And just I saw a quick question that just came in from Scott, who asked that usually Amazon chooses which warehouses to ship FBA shipments to. What if they choose one that's very distant from a port of arrival? Is there any way to coordinate that to be more economical? Robert, give an answer to that.
Yeah. So recently, especially, we're seeing Amazon sort of jump from one facility to another, even for similar products. It used to be that large items would go to a specific set of warehouses. Products that ship out in smaller packages would go to another one. But I think they're trying to optimize their facilities more, given the high demand. So we see a lot of products, basically the assigned warehouses change constantly. So to answer that question, I think in most cases it makes sense to ship it to the closest port and just warehouse it there. If you're shipping from Asia, basically typically we try to store the product in in Los Angeles or West Coast somewhere. If your suppliers are in Europe, we would basically store them in one of our New York facilities, New Jersey, and basically distribute from there. We don't typically, choose the facility based on what location Amazon assigns, just because it changes all the time. And last thing you want to do is have inventory in New York and then Amazon all of a sudden starts sending your products to FBA facilities in Los Angeles. Because domestic trucking in some cases is more expensive than shipping goods from China. So, you just want to spend the least money to get your product to US first and take it from there. This is our approach.
Okay.
Yeah. So, Yeah, this one are other different FBA costs. Well, short answer is yes, definitely a lot of fees to take into consideration. Obviously, if you're using FBA, you'll be charged their fulfillment fees. So that basically covers picking, packing, right, shipping your goods from Amazon warehouse to your customers, and that's really assessed based on the size and weight of your product. So if your packaging is definitely something to take into consideration. If there's actually packaging you can play around with, maybe that could actually optimize a bit more and you can save a bit more on the fulfillment fees from Amazon. There's also storage fees, as mentioned before, so that's really assessed on a semi-annual basis. And then another thing to take into consideration is the inventory prepping fees that goes into, right, labeling, palletization, as Robert mentioned before. Amazon also has extensive long list of other fees, so monthly seller fees or selling fees, referral fees, return processing fees or repackaging. So all of these things are really something to keep in mind and make sure, as I mentioned, the P&L analysis that you do by product is really important, because by plugging in and understanding, right, how much it costs for you to bring your goods from factories to the US, and then figure out how much, fulfillment and all the other fees that goes into running your business, you'll have a better understanding of your profitability at the end of the day.
And again here, Amazon, does put a lot of restrictions into place. There are a lot of fees, but their website really is a gold mine, and they do a pretty good job of communicating that. And even if you can't find it quickly, Seller Central and the community there is really very supportive. And of course, logistics providers are always helpful there. One quick question that I saw about a max weight to put on a pallet. I believe Amazon's current maximum weight for a pallet is 1,500 pounds. But again, you can look online and on the Amazon website and get a sense for that. So thanks for that, guys. A really quick run through of what Alibaba Freight looks like and what it looks like from an FBA perspective. So really, we try to make the process as simple as possible. We know that it's complicated. We've worked together with logistics providers like FreightRite and Robert and FreightRite to really make sure that we productize this as much as possible. So if you go to alibaba.freightos.com or ship.alibaba.com to get started, and the URL is there at the bottom right, you would just put in what you're shipping, whether that's a container or more likely loose cargo, so pallets, boxes, or crates. You could put in the different sizes of the boxes or the pallets if you know the total size, and you could also just click on that little tab there at the bottom, or you could add multiple units. Here you'll actually select where that labeling is taking place, and we talked about this before, and that in many cases, if you're not 100% sure that your supplier knows exactly what he's doing, you really want to rely on the logistics provider to do that. It does typically incur additional fees. Obviously, it takes a little bit more work, but if you're not 100% sure that you can trust that supplier, we definitely recommend it. After that, you'll be asked to put in the destination, which will be an Amazon warehouse. We have all the FBA warehouses auto-populated, so it should be fairly straightforward to just put that in directly. And then you'll get the normal result screen. Probably we'll see FreightRite up there at the top, where you'll get the full all-in prices, be able to book it in one place. You'll have separate fees there at the bottom for the labeling and palletization. And then once you book that shipment, you'll manage it as per normal through your shipment console. One thing that is also worthwhile to pay attention here is that during the course of the shipment, and particularly for an FBA shipment, you may need a little bit of extra love around how to coordinate that. Right? Well, Robert was mentioning that you want to make sure that the shipment gets there on time. One of the most helpful features in that respect is, if you notice that little envelope at the top right, that slides into Messenger that lets you communicate directly with your logistics provider. So if you have a question, if you don't see a specific update in your shipment console, if you have any questions, just click on that envelope at the top right, and you'll be able to talk directly with the logistics provider and ask them any questions. That's really it from the process. It looks pretty simple because we try to keep it pretty simple, but on the back end, there's a tremendous amount of work going in order to make that happen, and in order to make it just go super smooth. A couple of links here, and a bunch of people have asked this. We'll be sure to send out the presentation afterwards. We do have another 5 minutes, so let's just jump into some of the questions that we've gotten in advance, and I'm also seeing some real-time shipments questions that have come in, so we'll try to keep them mixed. So one question, I guess a little bit less about FBA, although it really is important because customers tend to expect perfection when they get stuff on Amazon. So when shipping directly from my supplier to Amazon, how can I ensure that sufficient quality assurance? Definitely an important question. Maybe Shen, you want to take this one?
Yeah, sure. Definitely quality control is really, imperative when it comes to FBA, as you don't want defects showing up at Amazon's warehouses, or worse, have your customers write a bad review on the website. So we definitely recommend on Alibaba.com, at least when selecting suppliers, we recommend always asking for samples. So most of the Alibaba.com suppliers actually are trade assurance enabled. So this is pretty much our payment escrow services where you're transacting on the platform. You can find a reputable, trustworthy suppliers and asking for samples in advance. We also offer inspection and production monitoring services as an add-on for your trade assurance transactions. So what that means is really you can actually schedule and hire a inspection companies that actually could manage your production process throughout and making sure that they check everything and before your shipments gets loaded onto the port and delivered to Amazon for final deliveries. And then another thing I mentioned is actually, if you are in private labels, or if you don't want if you're concerned about the quality of your goods, let's say there's a lot of other sellers that are selling identical products, what we recommend is also, maybe you can consider the Amazon FBA inventory setting is defaulted to stickerless. So if you want to change it to a sticker sort of inventory, so you can make sure that your products are labeled, with a unique barcode by Amazon. That way your inventory is not commingled with other sellers' goods. So definitely something to consider if you're selling private label.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. And I'm seeing a couple of questions, a lot of questions coming in right now. The floodgates are opened. One or two questions about how do we get cheaper rates, and you could just ask Robert. I'm kidding. Freight costs money, especially if you're shipping large things. And one thing that we're seeing right now, we're in what's called peak season in international freight. So more people are shipping stuff out. In the beginning of the year, huge shortage of cargo space in airplanes because of COVID, and now ocean rates from China to the U.S. are higher than we've seen for over 2 years. On the container level. So freight does cost money. I'm sure that Robert would attest to the fact that the rates available on Alibaba are very competitive. So definitely look around. I think part of the value of the platform is that you really can see rates from a bunch of different providers. One important thing to bear in mind there is that you also get what you pay for, and you really, it's a good place to try to save money, but it's not a good place to try to save too much money, because it is something that you might end up paying the costs for. Another question that just came in over here that I'm seeing, Amazon now splits my items into multiple different facilities according to my total number of items I'm shipping. How does the freight forwarder and supplier manage this? Often the supplier does not want to split the products into different Amazon warehouse addresses because it's a labeling nightmare. Robert, how do you suggest handling that?
Yeah, so it's definitely a labeling nightmare. Also, very often it costs more to combine the shipments, to ship them separately, because you would essentially ship 3 separate shipments, and you would pay for some of the charges at least in triplicate. The international freight includes fees like for customs clearance and for port fees, which are basically not based on the volume or the size of the shipment, but are flat fees. So the more shipments you have, the more you pay, basically, versus combining them, which might actually save you money. So what a lot of our customers do, and especially the bigger, older sellers who've basically been around and have had the chance to experiment with a lot of things, they basically combine the whole order and ship it to one of our warehouses, and then we would basically separate them, label them according to your FBA orders, and then either deliver them to the 3 or 4 or 5 facilities that Amazon has assigned, or you can have basically Amazon partner carriers pick them up. We typically know ahead of time which facilities those are, and we're able to basically decide whether it's cost efficient to send it to US West Coast or US East Coast or somewhere in the middle of the country. Generally, between those three regions, we're able to come up with the best option to bring the whole shipment to and then distribute from there. It's definitely the most simplest and the one with the least chances of things getting wrong and shipments being delayed. So I definitely recommend shipping combined to one location and splitting it there.
Okay, thanks. And I'm seeing a bunch of different questions. I'm going to try to group into two questions that I know Qian likes to talk about. So first is around incoterms. So I saw, which I know Qian is one of your favorite topics. So just as one example of that question, when shipping through freight company from China to Amazon, should we always use DDP? And then the second question that came up, a bunch of people basically asking about scammers and how do you know who you can trust when it comes to buying on Alibaba. So that's incoterms and scammers.
Yeah, I'll try to cover this real quick, but we encourage you to find our previous recorded webinars if you want to know in greater details about incoterms and what to look out for, things to ask your suppliers. So definitely, it's possible, and it's always a an option, right? Using delivery, duty paid, so DDP. But what it doesn't really give you is, as an importer, you want transparency and you want control. Using a DDP incoterm or trade term, really, you're giving that control and power to your supplier. So, basically if things go wrong, right, that's between your supplier and your freight forwarder. You kind of have to really, play this telephone game and find out the information because you don't actually, right, you're not part of that process and you don't control the process at all. So we recommend really, especially when it comes to more, right, entry-level importers that are trying to get better and optimize on shipping and really build their business and considering their profitability, definitely look into, right, a more buyer-friendly or buyer-driven incoterm, FOB is a good one to start with, test the water because your supplier will still handle the origin side for the most part, and then you take care from, the port to the destination. So, definitely something to consider, but we don't recommend really DDP for like large, high commercial value goods. And then, yes, with the language barriers, things to, verifying suppliers. So great question. On Alibaba.com, we actually have a lot of different kind of check boxes for you to, or filters for you to figure out, what are the suppliers that meet your requirements. So as I mentioned before, trade assurance is definitely our payment escrow product that's designed to protect your transactions. So, with if you're transacting on Alibaba.com as opposed to, right, wiring the money to your suppliers or, PayPal or offline, any sort of non-official Alibaba payment gateways, then we really can't protect you. But if you're transacting online, making sure that you're selecting a trade assurance supplier, making sure that you're using our, value-added services for inspection, there are definitely ways for you to kind of mitigate that risk and making sure that the suppliers you find is, of good quality.
Awesome. Another question, maybe this one for you, Robert, and then we'll probably wrap up. What if I'm not a U.S. importer? How do I import to FBA warehouses?
Yeah, so this is actually pretty simple, a lot simpler than most people expect. U.S. customs are basically allow foreign importers. There's only a few countries in the world that do that, but you don't have to have an entity in U.S. You don't have to be a U.S. citizen or a U.S. registered company to import into the United States. You can simply register with U.S. customs as a foreign importer, and they allow you to basically import. My company does this free of charge for Alibaba customers. Some forwarders charge a nominal fee, but generally your freight forwarder or your customs broker will take care of this. It's a pretty simple thing to do. You just provide a power of attorney and some supporting documents showing that your company exists and that you are in fact a manager or an executive of the company. Or if you're an individual, that you provide your copy of a passport, I believe, and a power of attorney, and your freight forwarder should be able to take care of it within a couple of days at most.
Yeah, And one thing I want to actually chime in, sorry, Eitan, before we go, is that under no circumstances would Amazon actually be the importer of record, right? So making sure that you understand you as an importer, your business is liable. So if your products are really subject to, government agency regulations, FDA, CPSC, right? You need to understand that ultimately you're responsible for compliance. So definitely something to keep in mind.
Yeah. Absolutely. And yeah, we came into this webinar with a lot of questions that people had asked, and unfortunately, I actually think even though we managed to chip away at it a little, we came out net negative because I still see that there's a lot of questions that we didn't have time to get to. So I think what we'll probably try to do is try to get a bunch of answers for these and maybe put it up in a blog post or something on Alibaba. We do send out the presentations for this, so look out for that tomorrow. We'll also send out the recording for this. Robert, Chen, thank you so much for sharing some of your knowledge and your insights. And if anybody on the call here has more questions, please head over to ship.alibaba.com. It's not just for the price comparison and booking. There's a ton of content, a ton of information, some previous webinars like this that answer some questions that I definitely saw come up again and again. So spend time looking for that. Really hope that this was helpful and makes your shipment a little bit smoother when you book it. We look forward to seeing you next time.